tropical heat. Humidity so thick, even your hair is wet. And inside the long wooden house raised on stilts above the river, there's silence. The widow is silent. The elders are silent. The deceased husband's relatives too. But everyone understands. The decision has already been made. The woman will not leave the house. She will not go to another village. She will not choose an outsider. She will become the wife of her late husband's brother. Here, in the Asmat tribe on the swampy plains of New Guinea, this isn't a drama. It's not a scandal. It's a way to survive. Because in a world where the jungle swallows everything, where the river is the only road, and enemies can come from any side, family isn't about sentiment. It's a structure, a system, and the only hope. This is how the Asmat live. A people who don't know the word no. A people who accept death as part of life and a widow as part of the family. A people for whom the continuation of the lineage is more important than personal feelings. They're not like us, and that's their strength. Because in their world, survival dictates different rules and different forms of kinship. Where the river ends, life begins. While people in cities around the world discuss freedom of choice, the Asmat live in conditions where choice is limited by nature, tradition, and reality. Houses on stilts, canoes made from a single tree. No roads, only rivers. No hospitals, only the knowledge of ancestors. No police, only the power of elders and the laws of the clan. Women raise children, gather sago, the starchy core of palm trees, which forms the basis of their diet. Men hunt, fish, carve ritual figures from wood, and guard the territory. Children play by the water, where a crocodile can appear at any moment. They have no insurance, no pensions, no government support. But they have a clan, they have tradition, and they have confidence. If something happens, the family won't abandon them. But what happens when a man dies? When he leaves behind a wife and children? Who will protect them? Who will provide food? Who will pass on to the children the knowledge necessary to survive in the jungle? The answer is simple and ruthless: the brother of the deceased. Because otherwise, the widow and her children would be defenseless. And that's not a metaphor. It's a literal threat to life. Not inheritance, but responsibility. When a man dies in the Asmat tribe, his brother takes on not only the deceased's property, he takes on his family, his responsibilities, his role. This isn't marriage in the Western sense of the word. It's a social redistribution of roles that ensures the stability of the clan and the protection of its most vulnerable members, women and children. Anthropologists call this practice levirate, a type of marriage in which the brother of a deceased man is obligated or entitled to marry his brother's widow. This phenomenon is found in dozens of cultures around the world, from the ancient Hebrews to African tribes, from the peoples of Central Asia to the inhabitants of Oceania. Wherever society is built on a clan structure, where exogamy, marriage outside the clan, is prohibited or restricted, levirate becomes a mechanism of social protection. Among the Asmat, this practice is especially important because their society is strictly patriarchal. Men make decisions, lead rituals, own property. Women take care of the home, children, and gathering. But at the same time, a woman is completely dependent on the male part of the family. Without a husband, she loses status, protection, and means of subsistence. Therefore, when a husband dies, his brother doesn't just take the widow as his wife. He restores the disrupted order. He returns the woman to her place in the clan structure. Polygamy as a survival tool. Interestingly, in Asmat society, polygamy isn't just tolerated, it's encouraged among men with high status and sufficient resources. A man can have several wives if he can provide for them. And it's in the context of polygamy that levirate takes on additional meaning. The brother of the deceased, in taking the widow, simply adds her to his wives. This doesn't destroy his own marriage, it expands his family. For a Westerner, this may sound shocking, but for the Asmat, it's the logic of survival. The bigger the family, the more hands to work. The more children, the higher the chances that at least some of them will survive to adulthood. Mortality in the jungle is high. Diseases, accidents, conflicts with neighboring clans. In such conditions, the reproductive strategy is aimed at maximizing the number of offspring, and Leverett serves precisely this purpose. Moreover, Christian missionaries who came to the region in the mid-20th century tried to eradicate polygamy and levirate, considering them incompatible with Christian morality. But traditions proved stronger than new teachings. Many Asmat formally converted to Catholicism, but continued to follow the customs of their ancestors, adapting them to new conditions. The widow is not an object, but she is not free. It's important to understand that in the levirate system, the widow isn't seen as an object that's passed from one man to another. She remains a member of her husband's clan. She's already integrated into his lineage structure, into his you, the social unit that unites a group of relatives. To leave this structure would mean losing everything: children, status, connections, security. Divorce in Asmat society is possible, but extremely rare. There's no special ritual for this. The woman simply returns to her native you. But this means breaking with the children, who remain in the father's clan. It means losing all the investments that her family made in the form of a bride price. And it means stigma, because she left the clan that accepted her. Therefore, levirate for a widow isn't violence, but the most rational choice in conditions of limited opportunities. She remains in a familiar environment. Her children stay with her. She retains access to clan resources. And she gets a new protector who takes on the obligations of her deceased husband. The clan above the individual. Asmat society is organized around clans, each of which lives in a yoi, a long communal house built on stilts. These houses can accommodate up to several dozen people. Inside, there's a collective way of life. Resources are distributed. Responsibilities are shared, decisions are made jointly. In these circumstances, individual desires take a back seat. The interests of the clan come first. The death of a member isn't a personal tragedy, but a disruption of balance that needs to be restored. And levirate is one of the mechanisms for that restoration. The deceased's brother takes his widow not because he wants to, but because that's the order, that's the obligation. Interestingly, the Asmat system also had other forms of partner redistribution. Researchers have noted the practice of wife swapping between men, as well as long-term ritualistic friendly and sexual relationships between men known as mbai. Within mbai, partners could share their wives in a practice called papich. These phenomena, while debated in different researchers' descriptions, highlight the flexibility of social and sexual norms in Asmat society, where personal attachments are secondary to collective interests and ritual obligations. The spiritual dimension of levirate. But levirate in Asmat culture isn't just a social mechanism, it's also a spiritual practice. The Asmat believe in Bij, a spiritual force that inhabits all living things. A person's death doesn't mean the disappearance of this force. It continues to exist, demanding reverence and appeasement. And one form of this reverence is continuing the deceased's lineage through his brother. Traditionally, the Asmat believed that the death of an adult, even from illness, was caused by the actions of an enemy. This spawned cycles of revenge and headhunting, a practice that persisted until the late 20th century. The heads of enemies were necessary for the initiation of boys into adulthood. Cannibalism was part of the rituals that followed headhunting. All of this is a manifestation of the belief that the spiritual power of the enemy can be absorbed and used. In this context, levirate takes on additional meaning. The deceased's brother, by taking his widow and having children with her, becomes an extension of the deceased. He doesn't replace him, but complements him. He allows the spirit of the deceased to remain in the world of the living through offspring. It's a form of immortality available in a culture where death isn't the end, but a transition to another state. Changes and resistance. With the arrival of missionaries, colonial authorities, and modern Indonesian statehood, the lives of the Asmat began to change. Headhunting was banned and suppressed. Cannibalism disappeared. Polygamy became less common. But levirate has survived, albeit in a less strict form, because it solves a real problem: how to provide for a widow and her children in a context where state support is still lacking and traditional ways continue to dominate. Anthropologists note that the Asmat show remarkable resilience to external influences. Despite converting to Catholicism, many continue to venerate the spirits of their ancestors. Despite the appearance of motorboats, many still use traditional canoes carved from a single tree trunk. Despite pressure from the state, many maintain clan structures and follow the decisions of elders rather than the laws of Indonesia. Levirate is part of this resilience. It's a mechanism tested over centuries, proving its effectiveness. And as long as the Asmat live in conditions where the state is weak, where resources are limited, where nature is dangerous, this mechanism will continue to work. Not romance, but realism. In Western culture, marriage is associated with love, choice, personal feelings. Among the Asmat, it's different. Marriages are usually arranged by parents, taking into account wealth, youth status, and prestige. If a girl refuses to marry the chosen guy, her opinion may be ignored. But most often, she agrees because she understands that this decision isn't arbitrary, but in the interests of the entire clan. A bride price is paid for the bride, a payment that traditionally included stone axes, triton shells, and birds of paradise feathers. Now, tobacco and Western goods have been added to this. The bride price is paid in installments, sometimes over many years. This creates long-term obligations between families, strengthening ties within the clan. When a woman marries, she becomes part of her husband's you. Her children will belong to that you. Her labor will serve its interests. And when her husband dies, she can't just leave, because her family has already received the bride price. Levirate, in this sense, is a logical continuation of the marriage deal. The bride price was paid for a woman to enter the clan, and the clan retains the right to her even after her husband's death. Comparison with other cultures. Levirate isn't unique to the Asmat. It occurs in dozens of societies around the world. Among the ancient Hebrews, levirate was prescribed by the Torah. If a man died childless, his brother was obliged to take the widow as his wife so that the firstborn from this marriage would continue the deceased's lineage. This was called yibum. The name of the deceased should not disappear from Israel. In East Africa, levirate is practiced among the Luo, Pere, Hehe, and Sukuma tribes. There, it serves the same function: protecting the widow, preserving property within the family, and continuing the lineage. Anthropologists note that in societies where women are economically dependent on men, levirate serves as a form of social insurance, preventing the marginalization of widows. In Somalia, levirate is so common that it's considered the norm. Friends discussing this practice say, "This happens all the time." And no one finds it strange because, in a society where clan ties are stronger than state institutions, levirate is a way to maintain the social fabric. Interestingly, levirate was even practiced in Yuan-era China, although it provoked conflicting reactions due to Confucian notions of widow chastity. Wherever this practice occurs, it performs similar functions: economic protection, social stability, continuation of lineage, and preservation of property within the clan. The voice of anthropologists. Modern anthropologists avoid making value judgments about levirate. They don't call it backwards or progressive. They see it as an adaptive strategy, a way to solve problems that arise in specific ecological and social conditions. Ruth Mace, a well-known anthropologist, found that the practice of younger brothers inheriting widows, common in many parts of Africa, serves to reduce population growth, because these men are forced to marry older and therefore less fertile women. Other researchers emphasize that levirate can be a positive phenomenon in a society where women must rely on men for support, especially in societies where women are under the power of, dependent on, serving, or seen as property of their husbands. In such conditions, levirate ensures that the widow and her children are not left without a male protector and provider. Peter and Kathleen Van Arsdale, who studied the Asmat culture, note that after marriage, a woman becomes more closely connected to her husband's you and you unit. Divorce is possible, but rare. A woman simply returns to her you. Wife swapping is common and tacitly approved. All of this points to the flexibility and pragmatism of Asmat marriage practices, where social connections and clan survival are more important than individual attachments. Women in Asmat society. Despite the patriarchal nature of the society, Asmat women play a critical role. They don't just give birth to children and cook food. They gather sago, the staple food which requires many hours of labor. They weave bags and mats from plant fibers. They take care of the children, passing on the knowledge and skills necessary for life in the jungle. They maintain social connections within the clan, participate in rituals, and help resolve conflicts. When the men go hunting or fishing, the women remain the keepers of the home and community. Their work is invisible to the outside observer, but without it, the clan would not survive. And when a husband dies, a woman doesn't turn into a helpless victim. She continues to fulfill her role, but now under the protection and with the support of the deceased brother, who assumes the obligations of the husband. Children and the continuation of the lineage. At the heart of levirate is the question of children. Children in Asmat society are not just the future. They are a guarantee of the clan's survival, its status, its strength. The more children, the more working hands, the higher the chances of success in conflicts with neighboring clans, the stronger the position in regional politics. When a man dies, his children must not lose contact with their father's clan. They must grow up within that clan, learn its traditions, participate in its rituals. Levirate guarantees just that. The deceased's brother becomes a father to these children. Not biological, but social. He raises them, teaches them, initiates them into adulthood. Moreover, children born from the marriage of the widow to the deceased's brother are considered a continuation of the deceased's lineage. In some cultures that practice levirate, the firstborn from such a marriage is even named after the deceased. This isn't always the case with the Asmat, but the spiritual connection remains. New children are a way for the deceased to remain in the world of the living, to continue their presence in the clan. Rituals and ceremonies. Asmat life is permeated with rituals. Birth, initiation, marriage, death, each event is accompanied by ceremonies, dances, songs. The Asmat love dancing and singing, performing them to greet guests, celebrate the harvest, or honor the spirits of ancestors. The death of a man is not just a loss. It's a ritual event that requires action. Traditionally, the Asmat believed that the spirit of the deceased must be appeased so as not to harm the living. For this purpose, bij poles were carved, tall wooden structures depicting the spirits of ancestors. These poles were erected during elaborate festivals to keep the spirits of the recently deceased away from the village. Levirate fits into this ritual context. The deceased's brother, by taking his widow, is not just solving a domestic problem. He's fulfilling a spiritual obligation. He's ensuring that the lineage continues, that the spirit of the deceased isn't left without descendants, that the clan maintains its integrity. Wood carving as a metaphor. The Asmat are world-renowned wood carvers. Their works are held in major museums around the world, including the Metropolitan in New York and the Tropen Museum in Amsterdam. They carve figures of ancestors, shields, masks, drums, ceremonial objects. Each carving is not just art. It's a way of communicating with spirits, a way of transmitting knowledge, a way of asserting identity. Talented carvers are highly respected in the Asmat community. They create their works in the Jew, a ceremonial house where community leaders gather to discuss tribal issues and create works of art. Forests are at the heart of the Asmat way of life. But deforestation and excessive foreign logging threaten their traditional hunter-gatherer existence, and timber stocks on Asmat lands are dwindling. Carving is a metaphor for Asmat life. From a rough tree trunk, they create complex, meaningful images. They also create their social structure. From the chaos of the jungle, from the threat of death, from the uncertainty of survival, they carve order, tradition, resilience. Leverate is one of the lines in this carving. Necessary, functional, beautiful in its logic. Modern challenges. Today, the Asmat face many challenges. The Indonesian Transmigration Program, which moves people from the overpopulated central islands of Java and Bali to less populated areas, has led to an influx of new residents into the Asmat region, who are mostly Muslim. This has created religious tensions between the Catholic Asmat and the Muslim migrants. Deforestation is threatening their traditional way of life. Motorboats are replacing the traditional canoes that took months to make. Government subsidies are changing the economy. Young people are leaving for the cities. But despite all these changes, many Asmat remain true to their traditions. They still live in longhouses. They still carve wood. They still follow the decisions of the elders. And they still practice the leverriet when necessary. Lessons in resilience. The story of the Asmat and their practice of leverriet is a lesson in the amazing ability of human societies to adapt to extreme conditions. In a world where survival requires collective effort, where resources are limited, where threats are everywhere, individual desires must give way to collective needs. Leverriet is not a relic of the past. It is a living mechanism that continues to work because it continues to solve real problems. Anthropologists emphasize that understanding such practices helps us to see the diversity of human experience, the diversity of solutions that people find for similar problems. This does not mean that we should copy these practices, but it does mean that we should respect their logic, recognize their functionality in a specific context. The Asmat show us that social norms are not absolute truths, but adaptive strategies. They change depending on the environment, on resources, on threats. And what seems strange or wrong in one context may be necessary and effective in another. Between tradition and modernity. Today, the Asmat live at a crossroads of worlds. On one hand, ancient traditions pass down from generation to generation. On the other, the pressures of modernity. The government, missionaries, economic changes, globalization. And they are finding ways to balance between these worlds. They embrace Catholicism, but revere spirits. They use motorboats, but carve canoes. They formally obey Indonesian law, but follow the decisions of the elders. Leverriet is part of this balance, a practice that may eventually disappear, as headhunting has disappeared. But as long as it persists, it remains a testament to the resilience of Asmat culture, its ability to adapt without losing its identity. It is not a frozen, archaic practice. It is a living tradition that continues to evolve, responding to the challenges of the times. And perhaps that is the main lesson. Cultures do not die as long as they are able to adapt, as long as they find ways to answer new questions, drawing on old knowledge. The Asmat are living proof of this ability. A people who have gone through colonization, Christianization, modernization, and have remained Asmat, with their long houses, with their carvings, with their rituals, and with their ways of caring for widows and children left without protection.